Before I show you sum, count and average, I just want to go through how Excel works, just in case you've not used it before. So these are your cells here, and you've got the column letter and the row number, and that's shown in this cell here. So at the moment I'm in B3. So I could just write a formula in here. I sometimes do this with my own calculations rather than using a calculator. I could say equals 26 plus 3, and that's my result. And if I look up there in the formula bar, that's what I've written. I could just type those figures into cells and then refer to those cells. Equals this cell, so it's B5 plus this cell here, C5. And there's my answer, and I look up there and it's equals B5 plus C5, or as you're going to see in the first example on the next section, equals sum So the colon is the range, is selecting the first cell and the last cell. Because there's only two cells here, I could select them individually and say equals sum, open bracket, click the first cell, comma, click this cell, and it gives me the same result. If I'm on a call and I don't have time to do a formula, I can just highlight these two and look on my status bar down here, and it gives me the answers and some other answers too. I can right click here. Minimum and maximum aren't usually there. You might need to tick them to have them showing on your status bar. I can left click here, place my cursor, Control V to paste, and I can copy my answers from my status bar into a cell. However, just be aware that it's obviously not dynamic. If I were to change one of these here, and now I hover there and it's 30, obviously I just copied and pasted that static value previously. That's why sum is good and formulas are good, because they update with the changes. And just in case you aren't already aware, so we have our plus. I can use the asterisk as the multiplier to multiply these together. I can use the forward slash to divide, and I can use the minus to deduct. I'm now going to move on to sum, count and average using formulas. So here I've got some sales data. These are the products, just a handful of products, and the totals here. In real life, you're going to be working with a lot more figures, probably lots of rows, lots of columns. I'm just trying to show you the basics so there's not too much to look at. So I've highlighted this range, and I can look down here and there's my total. I've already written the sum here. So that's B6 to B24. That's the range. It's got the semicolon there and it's highlighted here. See that range there. I'm just going to write it from scratch. Equals sum. Highlight the range, B6 to B24. I can close the bracket to finish the formula. I can actually just press enter and Excel will close the bracket for me. And there's our final formula up there. So this is dynamic. If I delete one of these, that updates. If I highlight this as well, this updates down here. Just undo that. There's a shortcut on the home tab called auto sum, and if I hover over, it also gives you the shortcut keys, alt equals. So let's just do that from scratch. My cursor's in this cell here, you can see up there it's in B25, auto sum. It's automatically selected that range. You just need to be careful with auto sum that it is selecting the range that you wanted. It will pick consecutive cells and will class that as a range, and that's your selection. Enter. This is why you need to be familiar with your data and have it laid out in a certain way. You don't really want any gaps, or if there are gaps in data, just be aware of them so you know that if you do an auto sum function like that, it might not give you the results that you want. If you just look on my best practice video, I'll have the ways you want to lay out a table so you prevent some of those errors. So just here, if I delete one of these, and let's just delete this, and I were to do auto sum again, this isn't a consecutive range anymore. Luckily I can spot that it's in my eye line, it's all on that one page. So I can just amend that and drag that up myself. Or you could just have a 0 there. And then if I were to do the auto sum again, it does pick up that range. If you have a lot of data, you might not pick up on it. Let's just paste this. So we've got lots of rows. Let me just delete one of these. And then I'm working down here. If I'm busy, I'm engrossed in my data, I've got hundreds of columns and rows, I'm just going to go down here and pick this. Am I going to notice that it started at cell D10? I might just press enter, trust the auto sum because I know it normally works. There's my answer. I'm giving everyone that answer. If I click here and go into my formula, it highlights the range and scroll back up, I've made a mistake. It didn't pick up those figures there. So just be careful with auto sum. When you're not manually selecting the range yourself, make sure it's picking up what you think it is. Another mistake you might make is, as mentioned, you can highlight a column like this. You know all your sales data is in here. You can look down on your status bar. I'm going to be giving everyone that total there. But I've actually got a sum here. So really the total is just all of this. If I pick the whole column, I'm double counting. So again, just be aware. So we've done our sum where we selected a range. If I just want to pick a few random ones, I can just do equals sum, this cell, comma, this cell, comma, this cell, enter. And if I just click up here, I can then highlight which cells I've selected. I can move these around if I made a mistake. I meant that one. I can just move it up by clicking on it and dragging it. Or equally, I can just type here. I don't use count very often, so if I highlight this, we've got the count there, and I can just do it here. Equals count, open bracket, select the range, enter, 19. This is the number of fulfilled cells, not just the number of cells I've selected. If I delete one of these, it's now 18. And the status bar works like that as well, 18. It's counting the number of values or fulfilled cells. Again, if I was to have 0 in there, it's back to 19. This one is slightly different. It's count A. I can't do a count on text. Doesn't work. But count A does work on text. Count A works on text and numbers. So if you're not sure or you've got a mixture of data, you can just go with count A. I'll just show you there on the numerical data. There we go. We've got the same data as before, where we've got the electronic components and the totals. We also have the price and the quantity. So this is actually a formula. If we didn't have a total, we can just do equals price multiplied by quantity and then drag that down. As before, we can highlight this and our average is there. If we had our sum still here, or we can just quickly redo it, and we had our count, there's the same amount of entries on each of these, so I can choose any of these columns for this example. Our average would be the total divided by the number of rows, 1527. If we didn't have these, we can just do the average. And there's our answer. So average is quite simple. If you already know sum and count, they work in the same way. I'm going to go through some percentages. It's not really an Excel thing, it's more how to do calculations, but I thought I'd just go through it. The reason I work so much with Excel and rely so much on Excel, really, the reason I've got so advanced in it is because my mental arithmetic isn't actually that good. So if someone to ask me a mathematical question, even if it was a fairly simple one, my mind just goes blank and I don't know the answer and I don't even try calculating. I just think, oh, it's a math question, I'm not going to know, and I just panic. So I would always have a spreadsheet up in front of me and I can just quickly add the numbers in there. Or if I know what sort of questions people might ask me, I can always have formulas set up and then just enter the numbers I'm given there and then, or I can very quickly just maybe do a calculation while I'm on a call or someone's asking me a question. Here we have the same data as before. We're just looking at the totals really, and I've got the sum already here. But what you might want to know is the percentage of each line compared to the whole total. So here we can see that's the highest figure if we have a quick look. So that's the highest one there. That's one of the lowest ones. That's quite low as well. So that's smaller percentages. The calculation is this number here, the line you're working on, divided by the grand total. I'm going to start it from scratch. We do need to get our cell referencing correct for this. So I'm going to delete this, actually delete that there. And I'm going to do it with the cell referencing first correctly, and then I'll show you what happens if you don't do the cell referencing correctly. Equals this line total here divided by this here, and we need this absolute reference. So it's got $sign in front of the row and the column. So I just press the F4 key. You can see there now I've got dollars and press enter. I can drag this down and these are all correct. One way to check in this scenario if it's all correct, these should all add up to 100% because each of these makes up part of the total. So down here we can just see 100%. And again, the spot checks the largest one here, that's the largest total and that's the smallest. If I click on there and just go into my formula, you can see what cells it's referring to. So it's this divided by this, the blue and the red. So you've got the blue and the red there. If I move on to, if I just escape to come out of that and click on this cell, it's this one divided by this one, which is what we want. For each line, we're looking at this total. So for this line here, this total, we got there, and that's correct. To make that work, we don't need to fix or add any $signs to this cell here. Every time we drag our formula down a row, we want this to move with it. So you can see that this is referring to 06, this one's 07, it's highlighting here which row we're on, 8, 9, so that's correct. I'm just going to toggle through my cell referencing here, so I don't want to absolutely reference that anymore because I'm going to show you what happens if you don't do it correctly. So just press F4 to toggle through all the options. There we go, no $signs, and then just drag that down. Okay, so we can see what's happening there. It's correct for the first one, but if we move to the second one, this has moved down correctly because we are looking at this compared to the total, but because we didn't absolute reference the grand total, it's not referring to this cell anymore, it's referring to this cell. So each time we're moving down a row for both options at the moment, which is incorrect. So by the time we get to down here, we're referencing that cell there. We're always comparing against this grand total, that cell that's O25. So when we write this formula, we don't want O25 to move, so we press F4 to lock it. This can move down. It doesn't matter if we put a $sign in front of the O or not. It only really matters for the column if we're dragging the formula over. If we were to drag the formula over, that will then move to looking at column P, but we're not dragging the formula over, so it doesn't matter. It's just the rows that matter. And there we go. Drag that down, and that's correct again. 100%. That's our biggest one. That's our smallest one. And you've got some of these here in the middle. When you're more advanced and you use pivot tables, you're probably more likely to use a pivot table for something like this. I'm just going to quickly show you because they are actually quite easy to do, but when you're using them, you do need to be careful of lots of things. So it's actually worth looking at the pivot table tutorial to make sure you've taken everything into account. But just quickly, insert pivot table. It selected this range. I'm just going to take that total out. So I'm just going to select this range here. And new worksheet, that's fine. And we can just add our product. So if I just tick it, it automatically recognises it as a row. And our total, it automatically recognises it as a value. We can change this to a %. I can right click here, summarise values and percentage of column total. I actually want to keep my values as well. So what I'm going to do is add this total in again. All I need to do is click on it and drag it down. So now we've got 2, and we can just manually change these. And I can click on here, column total. The pivot table has automatically put these in alphabetical order. So that one where we had the large one before is now down here. The figures are slightly different because of the rounding. If I just change this, I can go to value field settings, number format, percentage, no decimal places. So that's now 12% as it was. And we had this one here as the lowest one before, and that one here as well. So a pivot table is a quicker and easier way, and also it looks nicer as well. It's quite a nice table there. And you can add totals if you want. I mean, the percent total we don't really need, but we could go to the design tab and add the total. So you've got that 29,000, and you could here value field settings, number format. If you go to currency, it's going to add the comma and 2 decimal places. We could remove that if we wanted to. And that looks quite nice there. You'll probably quite often want to compare figures, so a variance, and that's that triangle there, the delta sign is a variance. So I've got these totals here, let's just say it's month, and that's previous month. So often you're comparing sales versus forecast, sales versus budget, current versus previous, whether it's month or year. So we're just comparing these figures. We can kind of, if we pick some out, this is a very high, obviously I've made these up so they're not really that realistic. This is very high and it's a positive. That's because the total, so the current, is much higher than the previous, so it's up 394%. This is 0 because they're pretty much the same. This is minus 87%, so a relatively high figure because the current is much less than the previous. And 1% there, it's a positive because this is ever so slightly higher than the previous. So that's what we're looking at here. This is the calculation. There's 2 different ways of doing it and you get the same result. The W is the current, the X is the previous. So it's current minus previous in brackets. So current minus previous divided by previous, or current divided by previous minus 1. They both give you the same result. They're just different ways of writing it. Another example is if you wanted to add or deduct a percent from a figure. So let's just say these are our prices here, and next year we want to add 10%. Our formula is, so AE6 is this cell here, this price, multiplied by 1.1. So we're really saying what's 110% of this, and that's our answer. So that's adding 10% on. There's another way of writing it, and there's probably other ways of writing it, where we actually put the percentage in a cell and reference that cell. So we're getting the same result. We're just saying that price, so that cell here, AE6, multiplied by 1 plus this cell here, that AH5 is this cell here. So the price multiplied by 1 plus 10%. So it's pretty much the same as that. In some ways, it's better to write it like this, because if you change your mind and say, actually, what is it if we add 15%, you can just change the figure in here and all of these update. Whereas in here, you're having to change the actual formula. Whereas here, we're just changing that cell, or you can play around with it a bit. And then just go back to your 10. To do this, you need to absolutely reference this cell, because when you're dragging the formula down, you need to be referencing that one cell for each of them. You're not moving down each time. So that's why you've got your dollar signs in front of the column and the row. And it's the same for if you're deducting 20%. If we've got promotion on, we're doing the price multiplied by 0.8. So again, what's 80% of 51? And that's the answer. So you're multiplying it by 0.8. Or we can write 20% up here, and rather than add here, we're doing the price multiplied by 1 minus this figure here. And again, you could then change that just to see what it looks like, rather than having to change the formula. And so if you think you're going to struggle with percentages, you could just have a template like this set up somewhere so you don't forget, and you can just type your numbers in and work out the percentage, just so you've got those formulas saved somewhere. I just added these down here. I'll do it up here as well, because you could do the formula, but you might not know if these are correct. I mean, it looks roughly correct. These are all a bit more than the number that's in there, but is it correct? So what you could do is add a very easy price like 100. So to add 10% is 110. So that seems correct. And the same down here, 20% off is £80. So you know, hopefully, even my maths is good enough to know that's correct and that's correct. So if you're not 100% sure of your results and you don't really know how to check it, just add an easy calculation in there to confirm. But just remember to delete them afterwards. There we go.